Before we delve into tonight's chilling tale, a quick reminder to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss the stories we have in store for you. Now settle in and let's begin. The fluorescent lights of St. Jude's Hospital hummed a monotonous tune, a stark contrast to the symphony of chaos and life that usually echoed through its maternity ward. Tonight, however, a heavy silence hung in the air, thick with unspoken anxieties. It was a silence that Dr. Alistair Finch, a man who thrived in the controlled bedlam of bringing new life into the world, found deeply unsettling. He was a man of science, of precision, a man who believed that for every problem, there was a logical solution. But the problem that lay in Delivery Room 3, the one that had been unfolding for the past 18 hours, defied all his well-laid plans. His patient, Isabella Rossi, was a force of nature. Even in the throes of a grueling labor, her spirit remained unbroken. Her laughter, though strained, would occasionally ripple through the quiet corridor, a sound that both warmed and unnerved Alistair. He had been her doctor for the entirety of her pregnancy, a journey that had been, by all accounts, textbook perfect. Isabella was the epitome of health, her body a vessel perfectly designed for the miracle it was about to perform. And yet, here they were, locked in a stalemate with a life that refused to begin. Alistair ran a hand through his silver-streaked hair, the gesture doing little to ease the knot of tension in his shoulders. He stared at the fetal heart rate monitor, its rhythmic beeping a fragile reassurance in the sterile room. The baby's heart was strong, a steady drum against the backdrop of his mother's exhaustion. But the baby was not descending. It was as if it was clinging to the womb, a silent protest against its impending arrival. He had tried everything in his medical arsenal. Oxytocin to strengthen the contractions, changes in position, even the gentle art of persuasion. His voice a low, calming murmur against Isabella's ear. But nothing worked. The hours stretched on, each one a new layer of weariness on Isabella's face, each one a fresh wave of frustration for Alistair. He was a man accustomed to being in control, to orchestrating the beautiful, messy ballet of birth. But tonight, he was merely a spectator to a drama he couldn't direct. Anything, Alistair? Any change? Marco, Isabella's husband, was a mountain of a man. His large frame crammed into the small plastic chair in the corner of the room. His face, usually a canvas of easy smiles, was etched with worry. He had been a rock for his wife, his hand a constant presence on hers, his voice a steady stream of encouragement. But Alistair could see the cracks forming in his composure. The fear was a living thing in the room, a third occupant in the sterile space. Not yet, Marco, but we're not giving up. Isabella is a fighter. Alistair's voice was confident, a well-practiced mask for the unease that was churning in his gut. He had delivered thousands of babies in his 30-year career, had faced every complication imaginable. But there was something about this night, this birth, that felt different. It was a feeling he couldn't shake, a cold premonition that settled deep in his bones. He stepped out of the room, the hushed whispers of the nurses a stark contrast to the forced cheerfulness he had just displayed. He needed a moment to think, to regroup, to find a solution that was eluding him. He walked to the end of the hall, to the large window that overlooked the sleeping city. The world outside was oblivious to the life and death struggle that was playing out within these walls. He thought back to his first meeting with Isabella. She had walked into his office, a vibrant, confident woman with a smile that could light up a room. She was a successful artist, her paintings a bold, chaotic mix of colors and emotions. She was everything he admired in a woman. Strong, independent, and unapologetically herself. He had found himself drawn to her infectious energy, a feeling that went beyond the professional boundaries he had always so carefully maintained. He had dismissed it as a fleeting infatuation, a consequence of the intimate nature of his profession. But as the months went by, as he witnessed the miracle of life growing within her, his feelings had deepened, twisted into something he couldn't ignore. It was a dangerous, forbidden territory, a secret he had guarded with the same precision he applied to his surgical procedures. A sudden, frantic beeping from Delivery Room 3 shattered his reverie. He sprinted back, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The fetal heart rate monitor was flashing red, the steady beep replaced by a high-pitched, insistent alarm. The baby's heart rate was dropping, a terrifying descent into distress. "What's happening?" Marco's voice was a raw, panicked cry. "The baby's in distress. We need to get it out. Now." Alistair's voice was calm, but his mind was racing. "Prep for an emergency C-section. Now." The room exploded into a flurry of controlled chaos. Nurses rushed in, their movements swift and efficient. Alistair barked orders, his voice a sharp, authoritative instrument in the symphony of urgency. He was back in his element, the uncertainty of the past few hours replaced by the clarity of a medical emergency. This was what he was trained for, this was where he excelled. He scrubbed in, the hot water and antiseptic soap, a familiar ritual that calmed his frayed nerves. He looked at Isabella, her eyes wide with fear, her body prepped for the surgery that would bring her child into the world. He met her gaze, a silent promise passing between them. He would not let her down. He would save her baby. The surgery was a blur of steel and blood, of focused concentration and adrenaline-fueled precision. He worked quickly, his hands moving with the practiced ease of a master craftsman. He made the incision, his scalpel a silver glint in the bright lights of the operating room. He reached into the womb, his fingers closing around the small, fragile body of the baby. He lifted the child out, a perfect, beautiful baby boy, but he was silent. Too silent. The room held its breath, a collective gasp of fear. Alistair worked on the baby, his fingers clearing the airway, his voice a low, urgent murmur. "Come on, little one, come on." And then a cry, a weak, fragile cry that was the most beautiful sound Alistair had ever heard. The room erupted in a chorus of relieved sighs. Marco was crying, his face buried in his hands. Isabella was laughing, a sound that was both a sob and a prayer. Alistair handed the baby to a nurse, his job done. He had done it. He had saved the child. He looked at Isabella, a wave of relief washing over him. But as he looked at her, at the raw, unfiltered joy on her face, a different feeling began to surface. A feeling that was cold and dark and utterly terrifying. It was a feeling he had been suppressing for months, a secret he had locked away in the deepest, most hidden corners of his soul. It was a secret that had been growing, festering like a malignant tumor, and now, in the aftermath of the birth, it was threatening to break free. He had fallen in love with Isabella. Not a fleeting infatuation, but a deep, all-consuming love that had taken root in his heart and refused to let go. It was a love that was impossible, a love that could destroy everything he had built, everything he held dear. He was a married man, a respected doctor, a pillar of the community. He had a life, a wife, a family. He had everything to lose. And now there was a child that was a living, breathing symbol of the love he could never have. A child that would forever tie Isabella to another man. A child that was a constant, painful reminder of his own impossible love. As he watched Isabella cradle her newborn son, a monstrous thought began to form in his mind. A thought that was so vile, so unthinkable, that it made him physically ill. But it was a thought that he couldn't shake. A thought that was taking root in the fertile ground of his desperation. He had to have her. He had to have Isabella. And there was only one way to do that. He had to eliminate the obstacle. He had to eliminate Marco. But Marco was a good man, a devoted husband. There was no reason, no justification for such a heinous act. And then, another thought, even more monstrous, more insidious, began to slither into his consciousness. What if he could have Isabella and the child? What if he could be the father, the husband, the family he so desperately craved? The thought was a poison, a venom that spread through his veins, corrupting his reason, his morality, his very soul. He looked at Isabella, at the new mother lost in the bliss of her newborn child. He looked at Marco, the proud father, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated joy. And in that moment, Alistair Finch, the man who had dedicated his life to saving lives, made a decision. A decision that would set in motion a chain of events so horrific, so tragic, that it would shatter the lives of everyone it touched. He had to have Isabella, and he would do whatever it took to make that happen, whatever the cost. The days that followed Isabella's delivery were a blur of feigned professionalism and agonizing torment for Alistair. He visited her in the hospital every day, his presence a comforting reassurance to the new mother, a cruel joke to the man who was slowly being consumed by his own dark desires. He would watch her with her son, a perfect, miniature version of his father, and the jealousy would be a physical ache in his chest. He would listen to her talk about her future with Marco, about their plans to raise their son, about the life they would build together. And with every word, the poison in his veins would spread, the monstrous thought taking deeper and deeper root. He was a man on the edge of a precipice, and the only thing that was keeping him from falling was the thin, frayed thread of his own self-control. But that thread was about to snap. It happened a week after Isabella and her son, who they had named Leo, were discharged from the hospital. Alistair had called to check on them, his voice a carefully constructed mask of professional concern. Isabella had answered, her voice tired but happy. She told him that Marco was out, that she was alone with the baby. And in that moment, something inside Alistair broke. He drove to her house, his mind a chaotic whirl of conflicting emotions. He didn't know what he was going to do, what he was going to say. He only knew that he had to see her, that he had to be near her. He parked his car down the street, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He walked to her front door, his hand hovering over the doorbell. He was about to turn back, to retreat to the safety of his own carefully constructed life, when the door opened. Isabella stood there, a vision of maternal beauty. She was wearing a simple cotton dress, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked tired, but she was radiant. She was holding Leo, the tiny baby nestled against her chest. She smiled when she saw him, a warm, genuine smile that was like a knife to his heart. Alistair, what a surprise. Is everything okay? I was just in the neighborhood. I wanted to see how you were doing. The lie came easily, a well-rehearsed line from a play he had been performing for months. We're doing great. A little sleep-deprived, but great. She stepped aside, a silent invitation to enter. He hesitated for a moment, then stepped across the threshold, into the lion's den. The house was filled with the scent of baby powder and fresh flowers. It was a home, a sanctuary of love and happiness. It was everything he wanted, everything he couldn't have. He followed her into the living room, a sun-drenched space filled with her vibrant paintings. He sat on the couch, his hands clasped together, a desperate attempt to control the tremor that was running through his body. She sat opposite him, Leo still cradled in her arms. She talked about the baby, about the sleepless nights, about the overwhelming love she felt for her son. And as she talked, Alistair found himself getting lost in the sound of her voice, in the warmth of her smile. He was a moth to a flame, and he knew that he was about to get burned. He looks just like Marco, she said, her voice soft with affection. The words were a trigger, a spark that ignited the tinderbox of his emotions. The jealousy, the rage, the desperation, it all came rushing to the surface. He stood up, his movements abrupt, his face a mask of cold fury. Isabella, there's something I have to tell you. His voice was low, his words laced with a dangerous intensity. She looked up at him, her smile fading, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. What is it, Alistair? You're scaring me. I love you, Isabella. I'm in love with you. The words were out, a confession that had been bottled up for too long. He had crossed a line, a point of no return. She stared at him, her face a mixture of shock and disbelief. Alistair, you don't know what you're saying. You're married. I'm married. I don't care. I love you. And I know you feel something for me too. He took a step towards her, his eyes burning with a desperate, all-consuming passion. No, Alistair, you're wrong. I care about you as a friend, as my doctor, but that's all. I love Marco. He's my husband, the father of my child. Her voice was firm, her words a clear, unequivocal rejection. But Alistair was beyond reason. He was a man possessed, a man driven by a love that had become a twisted, obsessive madness. He reached for her, his hands closing around her arms. "You're lying. I can see it in your eyes. You want me as much as I want you. No, let go of me." She struggled against his grip, her voice rising in panic. Leo started to cry, his small wails a frantic alarm in the tense silence of the room. The baby's cries seemed to snap Alistair out of his trance. He let go of her, a look of horror on his face. He had scared her. He had scared the woman he loved. He had become the monster he had been so desperately trying to keep at bay. He stumbled back, his mind a chaotic mess of shame and self-loathing. "I'm sorry, Isabella. I'm so sorry." He turned and fled, his heart a gaping wound in his chest. He drove home in a daze, the world outside his car a blur of muted colors and muffled sounds. He had destroyed everything. He had lost her forever, and it was all his own fault. He walked into his house, a cold, sterile space that had never truly felt like a home. His wife, Eleanor, was in the kitchen, her back to him. She was a good woman, a kind woman, a woman he had once loved. But their marriage had become a hollow shell, a comfortable arrangement devoid of passion or connection. He had been living a lie for years, and now the lie was unraveling. Eleanor turned, a smile on her face. But the smile faltered when she saw the look on his face. "Alistair? What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." He couldn't speak. He couldn't tell her the truth. He couldn't confess to the monster he had become. So he did what he had always done. He lied. Just a long day at the hospital. A difficult delivery. But Eleanor was not a fool. She had seen the change in him over the past few months, the distance that had grown between them. She knew that something was wrong, that there was a secret he was keeping from her. "Is it another woman, Alistair?" Her voice was quiet, her words a soft, accusatory whisper. The question hung in the air, a sword of Damocles suspended over his head. He could deny it, he could lie again. But he was tired of the lies. He was tired of the pretense. He was tired of the man he had become. "Yes," he said, the word a barely audible whisper. Eleanor's face crumpled, the pain of his betrayal a raw, open wound. "Who is she?" He couldn't tell her. He couldn't say her name. He couldn't defile her memory with the sordid details of his obsession. "It doesn't matter. It's over." But it wasn't over. It was far from over. Because in that moment, as he looked at the pain in his wife's eyes, a new, even more insidious thought began to form in his mind. A thought that was born out of his desperation, his shame, his self-loathing. He had to fix this. He had to undo the damage he had done. He had to get Isabella back. And there was only one way to do that. He had to eliminate the problem. He had to eliminate Marco. But how? How could he commit such a heinous act and get away with it? He was a doctor, a man of science. He knew about poisons, about anatomy, about the subtle, undetectable ways a life could be extinguished. He was a man who held the power of life and death in his hands every day. And now he was about to use that power for a purpose so dark, so twisted, that it would forever stain his soul. He began to plan, his mind a cold, calculating machine. He researched poisons, he studied Marco's habits, he looked for a window of opportunity. He was a man on a mission, a man driven by a love that had become a murderous obsession. The opportunity came a few weeks later. Marco was a runner, a man who prided himself on his physical fitness. He ran the same route every morning, a secluded path through a wooded park. It was the perfect place for an accident. Alistair acquired the poison, a rare, fast-acting toxin that was almost impossible to detect. He staked out the park, he learned Marco's routine, he planned every detail with the precision of a surgeon. He was about to commit the perfect crime. The night before, he couldn't sleep. He lay in bed next to his wife, the woman he had betrayed, the woman whose life he was about to shatter. He was a monster, a creature of the night. But he was a monster who was in love. And in his twisted, warped mind, That was all the justification he needed. He got up before dawn, his movements silent, his actions deliberate. He drove to the park, the poison in a small, unmarked vial in his pocket. He waited for Marco, his heart a cold, hard knot in his chest. Marco appeared, a solitary figure in the early morning light. He was running at a steady pace, his breath a white cloud in the chilly air. Alistair watched him, a predator stalking its prey. He waited for the right moment, for the moment when Marco was at his most vulnerable. He stepped out from behind a tree, a syringe in his hand. Marco stopped, a look of surprise on his face. "Dr. Finch? What are you doing here?" Alistair didn't answer. He lunged at Marco, the syringe a silver glint in the pale light. Marco fought back, his instincts kicking in. But Alistair was stronger, his movements fueled by a desperate, adrenaline-fueled rage. He plunged the syringe into Marco's neck, the poison a fiery, searing pain. Marco's eyes widened, a look of disbelief on his face. He staggered back, his body convulsing. He fell to the ground, his life ebbing away with every passing second. Alistair stood over him, his chest heaving, his mind a blank, empty void. He had done it. He had killed a man. He turned and ran, the syringe in his hand. He drove home, his mind a chaotic mess of conflicting emotions. He was a murderer. He was a monster. But he was also a man who was in love. And in his twisted, warped mind, that was all that mattered. He walked into his house, his wife still asleep. He showered, scrubbing the scent of death from his skin. He dressed, his movements a robotic, soulless pantomime. He was a man who was living a lie, a man who had become a monster. And now he was about to claim his prize. He drove to Isabella's house, his heart a mixture of excitement and trepidation. He was about to have everything he had ever wanted. He was about to have Isabella. He knocked on the door, a confident, self-assured smile on his face. Isabella opened the door, her face a mask of grief. Her eyes were red and swollen, her body trembling. "Alistair, it's Marco. He's dead." Her voice was a raw, broken whisper. Alistair feigned surprise, his face a carefully constructed mask of concern. "What happened?" "They don't know. They found him in the park. They think it was a heart attack." Alistair put his arms around her, a gesture of comfort that was a cruel, twisted lie. "I'm so sorry, Isabella. I'm so sorry." He held her, his heart a cold, hard stone in his chest. He had done it. He had gotten away with murder. He had everything he had ever wanted. He had Isabella. But as he held her, as he felt the tremors of her grief, a small, insidious doubt began to creep into his mind. Had he really gotten away with it? Or had he just set in motion a chain of events that would lead to his own destruction? He was a man who had played God, a man who had taken a life to get what he wanted. And he was about to discover that there was a price to be paid for playing God. A price that was far higher than he could ever have imagined. In the weeks that followed Marco's death, Alistair played the part of the grieving friend to perfection. He was a constant presence at Isabella's side, a pillar of strength in her time of need. He helped with the funeral arrangements, he looked after Leo, he was the shoulder she cried on. He was everything a good friend should be. He was also a monster, a murderer who was hiding in plain sight. He was patient. He knew that he couldn't rush things, that he had to give her time to grieve. But with every passing day, his obsession grew, his desire for her becoming a gnawing, insatiable hunger. He wanted her, he needed her, and he was willing to do whatever it took to make her his. He began to subtly, insidiously poison her mind against Marco. He would plant seeds of doubt. He would make casual remarks that were designed to tarnish his memory. He would hint at a secret life, at a side of Marco that she had never known. He was a master manipulator, a puppeteer who was pulling the strings of her grief. And Isabella, in her vulnerable, grief-stricken state, was an easy target. She began to question everything she had known about her husband, about their life together. She began to see him through Alistair's eyes, to see the flaws, the imperfections, the cracks in their seemingly perfect marriage. Alistair was a patient man. He waited for the right moment, for the moment when she was at her most vulnerable. And then he made his move. He confessed his love for her again. His words a carefully crafted mixture of passion and sympathy. He told her that he had loved her from the moment he had first seen her, that he had been waiting for her his whole life. And this time she didn't push him away. This time she listened. This time she fell into his arms. She was a woman who was lost in a sea of grief, and he was the lighthouse that was guiding her to shore. Or so she thought. In reality, he was the storm that was about to destroy her. They began a secret affair, a clandestine relationship that was built on a foundation of lies and deceit. Alistair was in heaven. He had everything he had ever wanted. He had Isabella, he had Leo, he had the family he had so desperately craved. He was a man who had gotten away with murder. But the past has a way of catching up with you. And Alistair's past was about to come knocking at his door. Started with a phone call. It was a detective, a man named Miller, a grizzled, world-weary cop who had a nose for trouble. He told Alistair that they had reopened the investigation into Marco's death. The autopsy had revealed some inconsistencies, some things that didn't add up. They were now treating it as a homicide. Alistair's blood ran cold. He had been so careful, so meticulous. He had used a poison that was supposed to be undetectable. How could they possibly know? He maintained his composure, his voice a calm, steady mask for the panic that was churning in his gut. He answered the detective's questions, his lies smooth, his alibi unshakable. He was a man who was used to being in control. He would not let this slip through his fingers. But Miller was a persistent man. He was a dog with a bone, and he was not about to let go. He started digging into Marco's life, into his relationships, into his finances. And the more he dug, the more he began to suspect that there was something rotten in the state of Denmark. He interviewed Isabella, his questions gentle but probing. He asked her about her relationship with her husband, about their friends, about anyone who might have had a reason to harm him. And Isabella, unknowingly, gave him the first piece of the puzzle. She told him about Alistair, about their close friendship, about how he had been her rock since Marco's death. Miller's interest was piqued. He started looking into Alistair, into his background, into his marriage. He discovered that Alistair and his wife were having problems, that they were on the verge of a divorce. He discovered that Alistair had a reputation for being a ladies' man, for having affairs with his patients. The pieces were starting to fall into place. Miller had a theory, a wild, outlandish theory that was so audacious, so monstrous, that it was almost unbelievable. But the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. He believed that Alistair had killed Marco to get to Isabella. But he had no proof. He had a theory, a motive, a suspect. But he had no evidence. He needed something to tie Alistair to the crime. He needed a smoking gun. And then he got a break. A big one. Came from an unlikely source. It came from Eleanor, Alistair's estranged wife. She had been a woman scorned, a woman who had been betrayed by the man she had loved, and she was about to get her revenge. She went to the police, her voice a mixture of anger and fear. She told them everything. She told them about Alistair's obsession with Isabella, about his strange behavior in the weeks leading up to Marco's death, about the night he had come home looking like he had seen a ghost. And then she gave them the smoking gun. She told them about a secret safe in Alistair's study, a safe that she had never been able to open. She told them that she had seen him put something in it the night of Marco's death. Miller got a warrant. He went to Alistair's house, his heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. He was about to find out if his wild, outlandish theory was true. He was about to find out if he was dealing with a monster. He opened the safe. And there it was, the smoking gun. It was a syringe, a small, unassuming object that held the key to the entire investigation. It was the syringe that Alistair had used to kill Marco. The lab confirmed it. The syringe contained traces of the same rare, fast-acting poison that had been found in Marco's system. They had him. They had the monster. Miller went to arrest Alistair. He found him at Isabella's house, playing with Leo in the backyard. He was the picture of a happy, doting father. He was a wolf in sheep's clothing. Alistair Finch, you're under arrest for the murder of Marco Rossi. Miller's voice was cold, his words a death knell for the life Alistair had so carefully constructed. Alistair didn't resist. He didn't say a word. He just looked at Isabella, a look of pure, unadulterated hatred in his eyes. He had lost everything. He had lost her, and it was all her fault. Isabella was in shock. She couldn't believe it. The man she had trusted, the man she had loved, the man she had let into her life, into her bed, into her son's life, was a murderer. He had killed her husband. He had destroyed her life. The trial was a media circus. The story was a sensation, a lurid, sensational tale of love, lust, and murder. Alistair was portrayed as a monster, a cold, calculating killer who had stopped at nothing to get what he wanted. He pleaded not guilty, his defense a flimsy, desperate attempt to paint himself as a victim. He claimed that he had been framed, that Eleanor had planted the evidence to get revenge on him for leaving her. But the evidence was overwhelming. The syringe, the poison, Eleanor's testimony, it all painted a picture of a man who was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. The jury took less than an hour to convict him. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Isabella was at the sentencing. She looked at the man who had destroyed her life, the man who had taken everything from her, and she felt nothing. No anger, no hatred, no pity. Just a vast, empty void. She walked out of the courtroom, into the bright, unforgiving light of the sun. She had a son to raise, a life to rebuild. She was a survivor. She would not let the monster win. She went home, to the house that was filled with the ghosts of her past. She picked up Leo, her beautiful, perfect son. He was all she had left. He was her reason to go on. She looked at him, at his innocent, trusting face. He looked so much like his father. He was a living, breathing reminder of the love she had lost. But he was also a symbol of hope, of new beginnings. She held him close, her tears falling on his soft, downy hair. "It's just you and me now, my love," she whispered. "And we're going to be okay." And in that moment, she knew that she would be. She had been to hell and back, but she had survived. She was a woman of strength, a woman of courage, a woman who would not be broken. She was Isabella Rossi, and her story was far from over.